Well, I think I've been waiting for you, Maria, to start, but I'm just realizing that perhaps you're waiting for me to start. So let me just jump right into this. And my apologies, everyone, for the 2-minute delay here. Günaydın, good morning and good afternoon. For those of you who are speaking Turkish, please find the simultaneous interpretation. The button should be on the right side in the lower section of your screen. Interpretation will be available from Turkish to English. In case anybody wants to go to interact in Turkish, that is possible as well. We can have the reverse throughout the presentation today. My name is Karim Albayar. I'm very happy to be with you here today. I'm the coordinator of the Connecting Business Initiative, or CBI. CBI was created or established by OCHA, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and UNDP, the United Nations Development Program. And the purpose was to provide support to businesses before, during, and after emergencies. I'm going to be the moderator of the session today, and we will be focusing on gender in the private sector COVID-19 response, particularly on best practices from Turkey. And I'm very pleased to be bringing this to you along with TurkConfed, with whom we are co-hosting the webinar today. We are going to have a very interesting agenda, I think, in which we will hear about why gender is important in private sector disaster management, followed by best practices from Turkish enterprises on how this has actually been done. Last but not least, we will introduce you to a guidance tool on this topic, and we'd love to hear your comments and experiences from your different locations. I know we have a number of participants with us here today from across Turkey and around the world. But first, I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Reyhan Akhtar, the Vice President of TurkConfed, for her opening remarks on the topic today. Ms. Reyhan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, I salute you all with the warmest of wishes on behalf of the Board of the Turkish Enterprise and Business Confederation, TurkConfed, and the Women in Business Commission. Welcome to our webinar, where we will be presenting you with examples of how women across the world have been affected by the COVID pandemic over the last 2 years. I would like to thank both the TurkConfed team and CBI for their valuable contributions in the process of the making of the webinar. With the world still reeling from the COVID pandemic that has been around for more than a year now, it has become important than ever to put our weight behind women. TurkConfed represents 30 regional and sector-specific federations, 275 business associations, and more than 24,000 business people from all over Turkey. Among the Confederation's member associations are 44 women associations. These associations are natural members of the Women in Business Commission. The Commission seeks to encourage more women to become entrepreneurs and employers in the industrial and services sector, to make women more visible in professional life, to follow up on the latest legislation and practices in this area, and to promote good role models. One of the most important pillars of our new 5-layered vision is women. The Turkish Enterprise and Business Confederation develops policies and projects to help women become active members of society by promoting gender equality, and acts under the motto, strong women, strong society, strong economy, strong democracy, and a strong Turkey. At our 13th Ordinary General Assembly in June, Orhan Turan, the chairman of our confederation, announced our strategic plans for the new period. Our vision statement, a new era, a new horizon, which I want to quote, also affords a special place to women. Ensuring gender equality across all aspects of life is indispensable for the social progress and economic welfare of our country. Increased participation of women in economic and social life will contribute to the sustainable development of our country, tackling income inequality between regions and development of social cohesion. Encouraging female employment will be one of the key issues for a robust growth and sustainable development of our country in the upcoming periods. The support and social security mechanism is necessary to increase our country's total factor productivity can be created by expanding the scope of incentives in a way that leverages women's power. Empowering women, especially with better education and careers, is crucial for expanding national wealth and accelerating our development momentum. Dear guests, dear colleagues, women has undoubtedly borne the brunt of the pandemic that is still continuing to affect the world. Data from the report, Impact of the COVID-19 Pandemic on Female Employees, jointly prepared by the Türkonfed, TÜSİAD, and UN Women, to assess the potential impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the private sector in the period from March to June 2020 from a gender perspective, showed that female entrepreneurs are among the most affected by the pandemic. At the Women is Business Commission, we think empowerment of women cannot be limited financial wealth. We believe giving women more active roles in aspects of life will bring prosperity and peace to the society. In partnership with 44 women's associations that are members of the Women in Business Commission, the most organized form of female solidarity in Turkey, we constantly engage with partners to look for new and reformist opportunities to mirror bureaucratic obstacles in the way of female entrepreneurs and help them expand their businesses. One of our most recent research projects, the impact of COVID-19 on female entrepreneurship, which delivered highly valuable results, lays out in detail the effects of the pandemic on female entrepreneurship. Erhan from our team will share with us the finding of the report in detail. This webinar is so precious as it allows us to see how women around the world are affected by the pandemic. Lifting the studies of women in the business world can only be achieved by embracing and promoting gender equality. Adding more women to the workforce starts with policymakers who know what gender equality is and work hard to ensure it. We believe that public policies and goals can only be achieved through collaboration between the public sector, NGOs, and the private sector. It is particularly important to us, the NGOs lead the way for policymakers. In terms of ensuring gender equality, the public sector, NGOs, and the private sector should work together to put their insights and experiences to good use in the name of promoting equal opportunities for women. We believe gender equality can be achieved more easily if companies embrace the concept as a value to be cherished rather than a burden. If we cannot get the message about gender equality out there and engage properly with organizations, institutions, and other relevant parties, any step we take toward empowering women and giving them equal opportunities will be incomplete. And before I end my words, I would like to draw attention to the Taliban rule in Afghanistan. Afghan women facing a regime that sees them as a war beauty should not be left alone or abandoned to their fate. We call on the United Nations and the international community to take action for women subjected to Taliban rule in Afghanistan. Afghan women should not be left alone against the Taliban. And I would once more like to congratulate the CBI and the Türkonfed team for their support with this webinar. It has been a pleasure being with all of you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Erhan, for those really excellent opening remarks. It was so interesting, and it's really fantastic, honestly, to hear about the reach and the scope of Türkonfed and the women's associations and the Women's Commission in Turkey, and really Turkish leadership on women's issues. You gave us a wonderful preview of the research findings on the impact of COVID-19 on women, and a preview as well of the best practices that we're going to be hearing about in just a few minutes from Erhan. And I really look forward to that. I think we also heard from you an inspiring vision of the value and impact of gender equality. And I think there's a great deal that we can learn from the Turkish experience. And I look forward to our discussion a little bit later in our hour today. As far as your remarks on Afghanistan, I couldn't agree more. And all I will really say about that is that the UN Secretary General has said that we will stay and deliver, and we will stay and continue to be there and to support the people of Afghanistan. Next, we will be hearing an introduction to the topic today from Ms. Maria Contro. She is our CBI gender specialist, and she'll be focusing on a short presentation on why gender matters in private sector disaster management. Over to you, Maria.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Maria Contra and I'm the CBI gender specialist. I will be providing a brief overview of why is gender relevant in the private sector COVID-19 response. We can go to the next slide, please. First, gender is an important consideration in disaster management. We have seen this in many ways. Gender inequalities may lead to increased vulnerability to disasters. They can heighten exposure to risk and restrict the capacity to respond and recover. This then further increases the already existing inequalities, such as increased poverty. So as we know, disasters don't discriminate, but their impact does. It can be seen in the graph by UN Women on the right. It shows the mortality in 7 disasters where sex and age disaggregated data was collected. Blue representing female mortality in percentage of total mortality, and red representing male mortality. Although this changes context by context, we can clearly see in this that gender is an important factor in disaster management. To add to this, women's needs and realities continue to be deprioritized in many disasters, and they continue to be excluded from decision-making. In addition to its contribution to human rights, better understanding and inclusion of gender considerations enable more targeted action, which will improve the results of disaster management. So what is the private sector role in this? The private sector is an important part of local communities. They are often first responders and can provide immediate disaster assistance. In addition, ensuring the resilience of their own businesses results in a win-win situation. For example, through business continuity planning, the private sector strengthens its own resilience and those of the communities they work in. Next slide, please. Currently, we are all in an ongoing global disaster of COVID-19. As in many disasters, also in this one, the impact of COVID-19 is deeply gendered. The pandemic has hit particularly strongly to women, and the situation has already reversed decades of progress on gender equality. Also, the risk of gender-based violence, exploitation, and abuse has increased due to movement restrictions. Every society and community depend on women to ensure safety and resilience during the crisis. Women healthcare and community workers comprise more than 70% of the frontline pandemic workforce and are active providers of informal and unpaid care work. Yet women continue to be systematically excluded from decision-making on COVID-19. A survey of 30 countries with COVID-19 task forces and committees showed that on average, only 24% of members were women. And in conflict-affected countries, women representation in COVID-19 task forces is even lower at 18%. Next slide, please. But let's speak more about how this connects to the private sector. Gender indeed is very essential also in the private sector COVID-19, and the private sector can have a significant impact to the topic through their actions, improving the results of what they are already doing. This can be done for the benefit of business itself, for human rights, and for the results of disaster management. When we look at why is this important, it is essential to recognize, for example, that women are overrepresented in hardest hit economic sectors in COVID-19, such as accommodation and food services, and particularly in small or informal businesses that have been hit hardest by the pandemic, leaving millions of women unemployed. Besides of being more vulnerable private sector actors, women and women-led micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises face multiple barriers to access financing for their recovery during and after COVID-19. Also, the responsibility of unpaid care work has increased in COVID-19. It falls mostly to women, as internationally, women provide 76% of all unpaid care work. This is then affecting women's abilities to work, study, and run their businesses. And therefore, it is hindering their abilities as workers and as business owners. It also has a direct connection to the business continuity of the company itself. The business sector continues to be male-dominated, and many of the realities affecting women are not considered in business continuity and response to the pandemic. Gender considerations would therefore make the business continuity more realistic and contribute to the resilience of the company itself. Then there is the critical aspect of digital gender divide, which means that women do not have the same access to technology in the same extent as men do. And it makes, for example, remote working or running businesses remotely more difficult for women. And remote working is, of course, at the core of the private sector COVID-19 actions and response. Next slide, please. So let's take an example of the digital gender divide and the private sector. There are a lot of aspects on why this is important in COVID-19. For example, a lot of the private sector support and financing is digitalized, and therefore the digital gender divide can influence the recovery of the women-led businesses. But as mentioned earlier, it is also very relevant in a more direct way. COVID-19 has led to heavy movement restrictions. Running businesses or working remotely becomes important. And this is one of the reasons why women-led businesses are falling in COVID-19. However, the private sector actors that focus on communications and cell phones can provide solutions to this. And we have already seen this done successfully in many refugee camps where the private sector has identified gap and needs and the mobile on the mobile phones, and then they have started to offer fit for purpose mobile phones and training for women to use them. So this is an example of the digital gender divide, but in reality, there are gender divides and gendered needs in many areas where the private sector operates. Each actor can look at the phenomena through the lenses of their own operations. And overall, win-win scenarios and good examples are always important in evidence-based learning and doing. Even more, they are valuable for inspiration. And we also hope to hear from your experiences at the end of the webinar. Next slide, please. Overall, it is important to note that all these matters can find their solutions. A window of opportunity means that while crises often have devastating impacts, they can also provide an opportunity for a positive change. COVID-19 has already done many things that can enable this. The pandemic has revealed structural inequalities within societies through the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on women and girls. The acknowledgement of it may change harmful practices, but we need to take action. We need to build back better, also in terms of the private sector and gender work, so that when recovering, we don't build back the same inequality structures. COVID-19 has also has a significant economic dimension, for which it has also increased interest in the private sector's inclusion in the existing area of gender and disaster management. The COVID-19 pandemic has in a way produced gender and private sector related publications on disaster management and enabled the development of this field of combining gender, disaster management, and the private sector together. It's a matter that was almost never addressed in any publications or materials prior to the COVID-19 crisis. Also, I want to mention that as women deal with COVID-19 consequences more directly, women who are involved in businesses have important knowledge to make the business more resilient. So we need women's expertise to be part of this action and solution. However, as it is often the case in many disasters, this window of opportunity will close quickly. The failure to address gender in the pandemic response, recovery, and build back better could have devastating impacts also to the future crisis. Next slide, please. So we call all private sector actors to conduct their COVID-19 response and recovery with gender considerations. Please find here the links to the available materials. We will be sending this presentation to all who participated and registered for the webinar. The CPI gender publication is answering the question, why is this important? The best practice document, which will be presented next, provides excellent examples of the private sector work on the topic in Turkey. And the guidance note helps you to get started on some of the priority actions for the private sector. Also, we invite you to join the CPI mailing list and follow us on social media, where we regularly send CPI newsletter and updates on the private sector in disaster management, including COVID-19 and gender topics. Next slide, please. So in case you have any further questions or comments, you can also contact us at the CPI Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. It's really a sobering presentation. Very grim impacts of COVID-19 on women and girls, but I think there was a note of hope and optimism there in terms of the opportunity for us to address the root causes as we recover from COVID. I see that there's a number of Turkish businesses that are really represented in the room with us today. We see more than 70 participants. I do want to encourage you to use the chat function to introduce yourselves and perhaps put your names and your organizations if you'd like. But it will be very interesting to discuss with you later today who has tried some of these strategies that Maria highlighted and who thinks they might be interesting or might be willing to try them in their own operations. Next, we'll be hearing how this has been relevant at the national and local level. We're going to be hearing from Mr. Erhan Arslan. He's the project coordinator at Turkonfed, and he will be presenting on some of the best practices from the private sector in Turkey that have been surfaced as part of Turkonfed's research. Erhan, over to you.
Thank you, Karin. Thank you for the moderation, and thanks for the teams at both institutions who prepared a great program and a webinar. Thanks to everyone who tuned in and took their time to listen to us about what we can do better in terms of gender equality in the society, in the business, and so on. So I will structure this segment into two. I will take a minute or two to introduce you to Turkonfed and what it does and why it does, to give you a better perspective in the following numbers game, the stats, and the best practice that I will try to give out to you and to everyone. So TürkConfed is an independent and voluntary confederation consisting 30 federations and 276 associations. As Reyhan Aktar said, 44 of them are women associations dealing with only women-related issues, but only the women in business, like gender equality, glass ceiling, women employment, entrepreneurship, and they also print reports and lobby for them, and it helps TürkConfed delve into their own vertical topics like corporate governance, SME, global competitiveness, and inclusiveness. And we can also transfer these information, these data into projects and capacity development for our members, which is very key. And we can also take these to international level, take this to Brussels, take this to CBI, take this to SME United, where we have membership and representation, to make it more heard and provide examples to other countries as well. And when it comes to employment and gender in Turkey and business in Turkey, we can say that the employment rate is 46% in Turkey overall. When it comes to women, it's 29%, and for men, it's 63%. So there's the discrepancy starts there. And for women, when they work, all of their careers span over, on average, 19 years compared to 39 for men, which is a stark difference. So the situation is hard for women already as is in Turkey. And this also has something to do how the employment structure and the working system is designed to benefit men in Turkey, but that's a part of a different discussion. So then the pandemic hit, and developing countries like Turkey can be more volatile in terms of economy, and they tend to get impacted worse. A similar case can be made for women. And in terms of employment and entrepreneurship, we see that we observe that women got impacted worse than men, as our polls, as our members report. In general, I'll just give out some numbers to portray this picture better. So 62% of businesses in Turkey said that they got impacted greatly last year, while only 3% said they didn't get impacted at all. And more than half of them said their income has dropped more than 50%. So these numbers change from region to region, but also by gender to gender. And also by nationality too. For instance, Syrian-led SMEs got impacted worse compared to Turkish-led SMEs in Turkey. And regarding gender, when the pandemic happened, I think this is valid for most of the countries around the world, childcare is increased because the schools are closed. Sick care is increased, hygiene and food security needs also increased. So the responsibility at home is increased for both men and women, but unfortunately we see that women is impacted worse because they bear more responsibility at home. It's right or wrong, but that's the reality in Turkey, and also I think it's a global phenomenon. And another data tells us that when there's an equality in the workforce, in a factory, let's say 50 men and 50 women are working, women got laid more compared to men, our members report. I mean, there's a huge load of data that can be checked out on our website. We keep these data by size of companies, founding year, by sector, and by also time. So there's a time series which we did this 4 frequencies last year for each quarters, and you can check it by bulk and by detail. which will translate me to my next message. I mean, the level of support in Turkey as is. So there are some good examples by this and policies implemented by the state and by private sector. These are usually revolving around, I mean, the public supports are usually revolving around birth support. So then when there's a baby born, there are low cash supports for mothers who gave birth, for nursing and for just having a baby. And there are also some support for inability to work due to birth, like birth rights. The women each get cash support equals to 3.5 minimum wage in Turkey. And they can also work half day after they gave birth, and they also get something called early retirement, right? Because they had child. And these are not all encompassing, but you can see that there are some mechanisms in practice to keep women at work. But these are valid for all the times. When it comes to pandemic, there's one example that we can talk about, which is the temporary work allowance. And when the pandemic hit, there was a new policy which was to keep people employment for companies which either halted or partially stopped their activities. And the state provided wage support for companies and employees to keep the employment at a higher rate when the pandemic happened. This is not gender specific, but it helped out definitely last year, which was a pandemic hit year for sure. Overall, when we look at the final numbers, we can see that 1.1 million people lost their jobs last year, compared to 1.5 million jobs lost in Turkey for men. It seems like the men's number is higher, but since women are employed even lower than men, they got impacted worse. And which brings me on to some specific best cases from private sectors which got implemented last year. Some are consulted from internal stakeholders, some are supported from external ones, and some are just company-led specific good cases. I will just name some of them, four or five, as much as I have the time, and then I will move on to some recommendations, if possible, if I can use the time smart enough. One is from Vodafone Turkey. The example is called Connected Women project, which aims to ensure the inclusion of women over the age of 18 in the digital society and include women who have received information technology training in the workforce. So last year showed that the digital skills will have huge impact in what we do in the workforce, which will enable women to have more jobs. And they will, since they have access to digital devices needed in a pandemic situation, this type of action will enable them to continue working and keep their jobs. Another one from the same company includes a new generation call center, which allowed women to work from home in the hours that they chose, so they can work from home as a call center employee and still have a job. Another example from Procter & Gamble, P&G in Turkey, they implemented flex work, allowing all employees to determine their own working hours, which I'm sure helped out last year. I hope to see these examples as a more permanent solution, which I will lay out in the recommendation section. Another good example is from Limak Holding. As you know, some sectors are mostly male dominated, like construction, like in engineering. So this tries to tackle that issue. This project implemented as the Engineer Girls of Turkey for 5 years to ensure both men and women have equal conditions in different economic fields. With this project, 430 young engineer women are reached out. So it's a good number in the sectors that are dominated but by men, unfortunately. Another one is by Shell Turkey. It's called Women Energy in Shell to increase women employment in the Shell workforce by 5,000 in 5 years. This not only applies to white collar workers, but also blue collars like female employees at fuel stations, which is an interesting phenomenon, unusual in Turkey, I can say. Philip Morris, another example. This is an example for internal consultations bearing fruit to help out women employees. So they launched the employee support program in order to receive feedback from employees and produce quick solutions. In addition, they aim to be a pioneer with the Global Certificate of Equal Salary Certification, which confirms that men and women are paid equal wages for the same job or work of equal value. And some small examples to move on. Before I move on, one from Kibar Holding. They implemented a parental development app and a play with children app for stay-at-home parents who are, spending time with children and spend some and separate their time of work and spending time with children at home. Another one is an example for external consultation, which is from a logistic company helping out with a series of seminars with pedagogues and psychological counselors to support families with children who has to straddle their life, like work life and house life. And these are some great examples from private stakeholders because they can provide examples to other countries as well as same country but public stakeholders. And as I move on to what we can do with the recommendation, I would say, one, we need more data, but also more visible data to see these striking truths in the Turkish employment system. Second one, I would say equal interventions for genders of both. And these have to be measured in an index, like gender equality index, when these interventions are made. Thirdly, we definitely could use more collaboration with NGOs. And fourth, there are these working models like working from home or hybrid models. We feel that these have to be recognized officially, so they are evaluated for gender-specific applications, which we haven't seen the results of to an extensive degree that we would like. And I want to finish with these words from various wise people in country repeated this in all sorts of forms. It goes, no country can grow by leaving half of the population behind, which I think applies to women's case in Turkey and globally. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Erhan, for those really excellent experiences. It's no surprise that so many Turkish businesses reported impacts from COVID, which really affected businesses all around the world. But it's great to know about the Turkish support mechanisms, and there's so much that we can learn from these experiences as well. The case studies, especially, which I found very interesting, are in a lot more detail in the publication. The link is in the chat. We'll also be sharing it with all of the participants in today's meeting through our post-meeting email and on our website. I should say as well, Erhan, I really appreciated the very specific recommendations you made at the end of your presentation, many of which I think would be useful in other contexts. At CBI, we have wanted to provide some guidance on how the private sector can start this type of work for their own benefit and beyond. And next, we'll be hearing from Dorothy Nussbrook from CBI, who will be presenting our guidance note on COVID-19 and gender for the private sector. After which, we would like to hear from all of you about your experiences as well as what you find useful and what you might want to change or improve. Dorothy, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kareem, and good afternoon, good morning also from my side. My name is Dorothy and I work with CBI as a research fellow, and I'm delighted to present the guidance note for the private sector on addressing the gendered impacts of COVID today. I'll keep this really short, and then we really want to hear from you and enter into a discussion, hear from your experiences, your best practices, but maybe also challenges. Just so very briefly, the guidance note, which is available on our website and is also shared in the presentation, which you'll receive later on, is structured in 3 sections. So it gives a focus on, it gives a general overview of gender and the COVID-19 pandemic. So it kind of summarizes what Maria has said at the beginning of the presentation. It also includes some targeted private sector actions, as well as recommendations. If we can move to the next slide. Thank you. So first, it gives an overview of understanding the gendered impacts of COVID. So it summarizes why women have higher exposure, how there's increased vulnerability and a lack of coping capacity. The guidance note then also provides an overview or a summary of some of the targeted response and recovery actions that the private sector has been taking or can take to address this exposure, to reduce vulnerability, and to increase coping capacity for women and girls. And it also refers to the building forward better approach, and to really understand the pandemic as a window of opportunity, what Maria said before. So basically, the first part of the guidance note will give you a very comprehensive overview of the gendered impacts of COVID-19 and how the private sector and their response fit into this. But now I really want to focus on the recommendations in the guidance note, because this is what we want to discuss with you, where we want to hear from you. If we can move to the next slide, Hisai. Thank you. So the guidance note has 6 main recommendations or action points. The first one is already very familiar because Erhan just mentioned it as one of his recommendations from the best practices as well, is the collection of sex and age desegregated data. And this is really important, especially throughout like regular data collection, to always have sex and age desegregated data, because only if we have the data, we can address impacts, or we can even see the impacts of the pandemic on women and girls and address them accordingly. The second recommendation or action point is to involve women workers as part of business continuity committees. As Maria said, this often is not the case yet. And it's crucial to involve them to hear their voices and to include their needs and realities, and then also address these needs, something like childcare, for example. The third action point is to use the specialized knowledge of your sector or company. And this is really crucial because there is a lot of knowledge already in the sectors, and just to use that specialized knowledge. For example, a tech company might be well suited to address the digital gender divide, whereas a health company might be really well suited to address health issues for women during quarantine. So really using that, tapping into that specialized knowledge. Fourth is to develop and to implement programs that really aim to increase women's coping capacities. So this could be to target women and women-led businesses or small and medium-sized enterprises with specific private sector interventions or response and recovery actions. So have really targeted approaches here. The fifth action point is to strengthen the collaboration with national, local, and international gender bureaus, women's networks, women's organizations, because there's a lot of expertise, there's a lot of knowledge already there. So tapping into that knowledge, tapping into those networks is crucial to have an impactful and meaningful approach and response. And the last action point is to raise awareness and to call for action within your business and your business community, to share best practices, join webinars like these and share experiences to really push this agenda of including women and girls more in private sector responses. So these are the 6 recommendations that are included in the guidance note already. And now we really want to hear from you. We want to hear your experiences within your own business sector. Have you experienced the same things? Do you think that something is missing? Where do you see challenges in this? So please feel free to either write in the chat, answer a question or a comment in the Q&A, or raise your hand and someone will unmute you and you will be able to comment. And of course, our experts, Maria and Kareem and Erhan, will all be here to answer your questions and to respond to your comments. So I think we already have one hand raised. If you could, it would be great if you could always briefly state your name and the company you represent or the organization you represent. Hissa, I don't know if you have already given permission.
Yes, I have given.
Yeah, perfect.
Yes.
All right, so
I think they can just unmute themselves and speak,
yes.
right?
So whoever's raised their hands, I think it's probably someone with a different name, because I think we have a lot of Selals here today. And for the comments in the chat, Maria, I don't know, would it be best for the interpreters maybe to quickly summarize them in English as well for all participants, or?
Or maybe technically it's easier if maybe Erhan can help us to translate the comment or question in the chat from Turkish to English, and maybe the simultaneous interpreter can do the same.
Yeah, that would be perfect.
I can do this to the best of my ability. I see one question from Huriye Demirhan from Denizli, and she's asking about the disabled people, encouraging them to work, take part in the workforce. So what can be done better, and what is already being done? If anyone wants to get that question, I can step in, or I can say a couple of words.
Maybe I can mention from overall perspective, and then Erhan, if you can provide your comments from the Turkish side. So what can be done? First of all, as we noticed in the guidance note, that there's a recommendation for the private sector to collect data that is specific to sex and age, but also to disabilities. So that is an approach that is increasing more and more, and promoted by many UN agencies and different actors to collect sex, age, and disability disaggregated data. And the private sector can have a very huge role in this, because private sector is collecting data all the time as part of their market analysis and other operations. Disaggregating data is quite simple thing, but it enables us as different actors to have more specific information of what are the needs, and then to address those needs, maybe from the private sector or humanitarian actors or different actors. But the first step is to have available in each country data that is disaggregated by sex, age, and disability, and then it will be easier to react to that.
Thank you, Maria. I don't know, Erhan, do you also want to add something?
I can say a couple of sentences. So when we think of the disabled workforce, there's a great deal of people who are not hopeful about finding a job, so they just stop applying, which makes them not considered when it comes to unemployment. So they're just not there, which is a bad thing for any economy. And there should be some updated data. That's what I would say first. And secondly, this working from home, like remote work concept, could benefit disabled people greatly, in my opinion, because the overall arching problem in Turkey is that the businesses, the factories, the offices are not too accessible to work by the disabled people, and remote work can bypass this temporarily. I mean, the core problem should be fixed definitely, but this can be a way to bypass the main problem, in my opinion.
Thank you. And I see that there's another comment in the chat. Maybe before, I'll just quickly remind you can raise your hand with a little hand on the bottom row that you see, and then we'll unmute you and you can feel free to speak in English or Turkish. There will be interpretation, so please don't hesitate to share your experiences. Erhan, if you could again translate the comment from the chat for us, or the question.
I think this one is just a reminder from our team to rename themselves and nothing
okay.
more.
Perfect. I don't see any comments yet. You can also use the Q&A to ask questions or to add comments. So it would be really great to hear from some of your companies that are represented today on your best practices, your challenges. If you could share any of that, that would be really great.
If while we are waiting for comments or questions, I could inform a little bit about the CBI work, what it comes to gender and disaster management and to the COVID-19 response. So CBI has also developed a publication on gender, private sector, and disaster management. It has a specific chapter on COVID-19, but it looks at the matter from the overall approach of disaster management and how the COVID-19 can contribute to the future crisis. So I will also post that link to the chat in a little bit, and that publication is a little bit larger one, so it will explain the phenomena and provide answer on why is this important. And then the two links that have been posted are, of course, the excellent document of the best practices from Turkey, from the private sector in Turkey, on how gender has been addressed in the COVID-19 response, and then the guidance note for all the private sector actors. And we would like to hear from you, hear your opinions on that guidance note. So those are more practical, more action-oriented documents, while the gender publication is more research-focused to give an answer, or at least to start to map an answer for the question, why is this important? I notice we might have another question. Maybe Erhan can help us to translate.
Yes, I was just typing. The person who has comments says, can you provide examples for this 6 core implementations? I couldn't make out what those core implementations were, maybe from your presentation, I think.
I think if we can go maybe back one slide, his slide, that would be great to see the 6 recommendations, and then Maria maybe can give some examples of how to implement these.
Sure. I can give some examples from a more theoretical perspective, but if something comes to your mind, Erhan, from the Turkish experience, since we have the best practices from Turkey, and many of those Turkish company best practices connect to some of these points. So would you want to mention one or two?
Yes, I would say a collection of sex and age disaggregated data. I can comment on it. As I said, there's a lack of data and lack of visible data, because we observe that some genders are impacted differently. That's been established, I think, through this webinar. But different ages, different people who are in different sectors got impacted differently. Let's say tourism in Turkey, like healthcare in Turkey, they got impacted. The former impacted worse, the latter impacted positively, and these change from different size of companies. Let's say larger companies got impacted negatively, but less negatively compared to smaller ones who had to, halt their activities. So that's it for me.
I could also mention one example. Of course, there are quite many good examples already existent. But when we look at the strengthening the collaboration points for gender, so I wanted to mention that, for example, in the CBI member network in the Philippines, the private sector has a seat in the humanitarian country team. So when the humanitarian country team is dealing with disasters such as COVID-19, the private sector is also present in that dialogue. And that is a good example of how the collaboration approaches can work and how the private sector could be part of the humanitarian collaboration, and also to not only open a dialogue, but also to maintain a dialogue for constant development to understand better how the private sector can work as part of the overall disaster management approach for their own benefits and beyond.
Great. Thank you,
Thank
Maria.
you.
I don't know, Karim, if we have time for one more question or.
Well, I think you can go ahead and take it if you'd like to squeeze in one more question. Why not?
Okay, I think because the next question would be about smaller enterprises, small SMEs, and if you have any experience of how to implement these in not just big corporations but also smaller companies. I don't know, Maria, Erhan, which one of you would like to take this?
Maria, do you have anything? I have some comments.
Oh, yeah, I only wanted to mention that there is also another guidance tool coming quite soon, which focuses on gender and business continuity planning. So just to mention here that there will be specific guidance and suggestions also on that topic. But Erhan, please go ahead.
Yes, I realized some of the examples are from larger enterprises because they have more capacity to devote to these, corporate social responsibility and impact investment and so on. When it comes to larger, smaller enterprises, I realized that it's very hard for them to grow and grow by revenue, grow by staff number, increase the range of products. It's very hard. And for a smaller enterprise to grow, it takes a lot of time and effort to get there. But the answer is, I think it has to do with capacity development. There's a lot of programs introduced by public and private stakeholders as well as NGOs. We have great programs and projects in practice to develop them and to take them to the next step. Because when you inject cash to smaller enterprises, it may lead to inefficient use of funds, or when you provide incentives, it can be a temporary solution. I think the answer is where the capacity development is at, because it's very hard for a smaller enterprise, let's say that has 10 employees, and devote one staff to gather information on growth, state incentives, or let's say digitalization or financial leadership. It's very hard to devote one personnel to grow in these areas and leave none unattended, or leave the company with inability to grow. So yeah, I think the answer is capacity development and staff enhancement throughout their careers.
Many thanks, Erhan, and thank you, Dorothy and Rayan, Maria, and all who shared their views and experiences today. This has been a really great conversation, but as we're running out of time, I wanted to move to the close. I would like to thank all of you for your interest in exploring the interconnections between gender, COVID-19, and the private sector. We will be sharing the materials from this webinar with everybody who registered, including the presentation, the best practice report, and the guidance tool. We welcome your inputs, comments, or questions on any of those publications. I know perhaps you didn't have a chance to really read through them and answer our questions right away here in the webinar today. So we certainly do welcome your inputs later on, and please do contact us using either the Connecting Business email or Maria's email as you see on the screen. I'd also really like to thank TurkOnFed, our CBI member network in Turkey, for co-hosting and sharing with us the good practices on how the private sector has successfully been part of or led gender actions during the pandemic. So far, this work has been extremely beneficial for Turkey, and it's really now a benefit to all of us around the world to see what we can learn from these experiences and how we can implement them on our own as part of our own work in the private sector. We very much look forward to continuing this dialogue with TurkOnFed and with all of you. So thank you all. Have a wonderful day, and please do send in your questions, comments, or suggestions. Thank you all very much.